And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another YouTube reading guide series. Today is video 07, walking through the Top Cow Artifactiverse, or as some of you may consider it, the Witchblade universe or the Darkness universe. To create this reading guide, I have read the 902 comic issues that comprise the entire Artifactiverse and more besides, and I've used that knowledge to build the internet's most detailed reading map for this unique corner of modern comics. During this series of videos, I'll be using terms such as volume with a big or small v. I'll be referring to comic readers by type P or type J, or I might refer to other companies and comic lines in passing. It might seem a bit overwhelming, and that's because it is, but if you do need more guidance on what all those things mean, just check out the introductory video in this series, which will explain all these points. That's video 00, and that's got a link in the description below. So with no further ado, let's go here. This is the entire Top Cow Artifactiverse arranged in a reading map. So this is really zoomed out. This is the entirety of the map that's available to download for free. But what I'm going to do today is I just want to look at what we've looked at previously quickly. We started off with the Before the Rise era in blue. Over the last 4 videos, we covered the Origins era in yellow. And today we're going to dive in here into what I call the Artifact era. Now, please remember that all these titles I've given them here are my own titles. They're not official titles by any means. So we're going to be covering the Artifacts era of this video and the next video. The Artifacts era is in a lot of ways simpler than the Origins era that went before it. It also represents probably the golden era of the Witchblade universe. Whilst I do love the first 25 issues that we saw way up here in Witchblade, the first 25 issues are amazing. I actually got them custom bound myself. I really love them. However, they're very much rooted in the 90s, from the art to the plotting. However, once we get as far down as here in the Artifactiverse, we're at issue 80 of Witchblade. And this is where we get to the start of the incredibly long run by writer Marz, and largely all by the same artist, Stjepan Sejic. Witchblade unexpectedly blooms in this era into a powerful modern mythos, and, well, to be honest, it's this era which is probably the reason why it's still considered so iconic and so popular today. That said, whilst Witchblade of course starts at the top right here, I'm actually going to start somewhere controversial and somewhere different. Just so that we understand Witchblade, and to get to read the entire Witchblade run in one glorious, uninterrupted, gluttonous feast, I'm going to recommend we start the Artifacts era somewhere else. I recommend that we actually start here, in this purple circle you can see, with a series called Hunter Killer. Now, Hunter Killer was written and drawn by Mark Silvestri, which you may remember from the earlier vids I did in Cyberforce. Silvestri created Top Cow. He was the artist and the personality behind the company, and Hunter Killer represents him returning to that role in a much more hands-on way. This is a 12-issue series, and it's available as a single trade paperback collection. The first 6 issues are also available as a much slimmer hardcover as well. Hunter Killer is an awesome sci-fi 90s retro story, but with modern sensibilities. When you read it, you will not understand where it fits in with the Artifactiverse, but bear with me, it is important and it will be relevant. After reading Hunter Killer, I would recommend you check out Vice, which I have here in a similar purple circle with dotted lines to indicate that it's actually uncollected. So Vice is a 5-issue limited series from Top Cow, around about the same time as Hunter Killer. It's a great series, and again, it seems to have no link to Witchblade. However, it is clearly set in the same world as Hunter Killer, and what the hell, it's a good read from the same publisher in the same era. Like I say, unfortunately, it's never been collected, so you'll have to do as I did and hunt down the single issues. This then takes us to our last random mini-series before the main event, and this is called Necromancer. Now, Necromancer was released in 2005. It's a 6-issue series that I enjoyed a fair bit, and it'll be very relevant later on. I don't believe this has ever been collected as a trade paperback, but I could be wrong. Please give me a shout in the comments below if that's what you think. Now, with all that foreplay out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into what we're all here for, Witchblade. So we looked at the Origins era last time. We looked at issues 76 to 79. And the Artifacts era starts here with this iconic image. This is the cover of issue 80 of Witchblade, and is also the cover of the first volume of this era. This is unfortunately where you need to concentrate, as the numbering is about to get a bit weird. Witchblade is around 185 issues in a straight run, numbered 1 to 185. That means it's a single volume with a big V. However, these issues are collected in trade collections, which we can call volumes with a small v. This is how retailers like comic shops or Amazon refer to them when you search for them. We saw this in the Origins era, up here where we saw Witchblade Origins volumes 1, 2, and 3. We then saw a long run of uncollected issues. And now, at the start of the Artifacts era, we'll see collected trade paperbacks again. They start with the one we were just looking at, which is unhelpfully called Volume 1, even though it collects issues 80 to 85. So remember, that is volume with a small v. It also has a subtitle. It has the subtitle Witch Hunt, and also has that distinctive cover. In terms of tracking these down, what I'm going to do is what I always do. I am going to show you the physical covers of the physical collected editions as we go through, so you can spot them when you see them in a shop, because the numbers and the spines aren't as helpful as one would think. So to start off with, we have that, which is Volume 1 Witch Hunt, collecting issues 80 to 85. Next up, we have volume with a small v2. This is called Awakenings and collects issues 86 to 92. We then have volume with a small v3. With this cover here, this is called Gods and Monsters and collects issues 93 to 100. And we then have the fourth volume with a small v, the fourth collection in the Artifacts era, which is called Eternal, and that collects issues 101 to 109. So that may have seemed pretty straightforward, but this is now where stuff starts to get a little bit complicated, I'm afraid. So what happens next is an event called Firstborn. Now we're looking at this, which is the collection number 5, but for a moment I just want to step away and look at this event Firstborn, which is comprised of the following issues. This is the reading list that you need to read Firstborn. It comprises of the first issue in it, which is called Unholy Union. This is a crossover with Marvel, so it's basically never going to get recollected. I'm showing you an image of it here so you can see what the cover of that single issue looks like. After reading Unholy Union, you then need to read an issue called Firstborn Issue 1. Firstborn is a mini-series, so Firstborn Issue 1. You then read Witchblade Issue 110. You then read Firstborn Issue 2. You then read Witchblade Issue 111. You then read Firstborn 3. And you can then read Firstborn Aftermath before you move on to Witchblade's issues 112 to 115. Now, there's a few important things to note here. Firstly, this event does include cameos from the Darkness and the Magdalena, but not to worry, it's pretty self-contained. It also contains cameos from both Cyberforce. We dealt with them way back in video 1, and they have a large presence in this era too, which we'll cover next video, as well as a cameo from the Hunter-Killer people we literally just mentioned. If you want to pick it up in a collector's edition, then your options basically suck. Let's go back to the map here. So this was the 5th collection of Witchblade from this era. This is Witchblade volume with a small v5. It's called Firstborn, and it collects Witchblade issues 110 to 115 and Firstborn issues 1 to 3. That means that it lacks the Unholy Union issue at the start, which is the crossover with Marvel, and it also lacks Firstborn Aftermath. This is the cover of the trade paperback I show on my map, and it's the one that I have. Whilst this collection exists, I've left the line around it dotted to indicate that it's not collected properly. Alternatively, there's been a recent re-release of it into something called Artifacts Origins. I know, not helpful. That sort of name is not useful whatsoever. Artifacts Origins collects Firstborn's issues 1 to 3, Witchblade issues 110 to 112, and then Firstborn Aftermath. In other words, you're still missing Unholy Union and 3 issues of Witchblade that you would have seen had you bought Collection Volume 5. Each option has its own merits and demerits depending on largely whether you lean to be more of a Witchblade fan or a Darkness fan. The Witchblade volume means you have a smooth continuation of your Witchblade issues, but the volume that includes Aftermath is probably better for fans of Jackie Estacado, as that issue introduces a character that becomes a major feature in the Darkness series, a character called the Sovereign. Sorry if I can't be more helpful. I'm getting mine custom bound, so all I can say is you need to consider how to collect these if you want to keep them physically. There is also one other option when it comes to buying this, which we'll touch on in literally a minute. But before that, if we're back on the map here, let's have a look at this. This is a much more straightforward volume. This is a volume with a small v6 or collection 6 of Witchblade. This contains issues 116 to 120, so 116 to 120. In other words, it follows straight on from the volume above it, which is the volume 5 in the dotted circle, because that ends with issue 115. Volume 6 is this distinctive cover. We sort of split between Sarah on one side and another character on the other side. I couldn't actually find a name for this volume. I don't know what it's actually called, so I'm just calling it Volume 6. After that, we then move smoothly on to another event, which you can see here. This is a second event that's even more confusing than Firstborn. This event is called Broken Trinity and comprised of the following issues: Broken Trinity Prelude, Broken Trinity 1, then you have to read Broken Trinity Darkness, it's a one-shot. You then read Broken Trinity Issue 2. You should then read Broken Trinity Angelus, also a one-shot, and then Broken Trinity 3, before it concludes with Broken Trinity Witchblade and ends with Broken Trinity Aftermath. This is collected in its own standalone trade paperback. You can see the cover here on the map. But unfortunately, as I read this in single issues, I can't say with certainty what this trade collection actually contains. If anyone knows, please sound off in the comments below. I really hope it has all of the issues I just talked about. And now is as good a time as any to revisit what I was about to mention before, which is not only a way to collect Broken Trinity, but also a way to collect Firstborn. You see, both the Firstborn and Broken Trinity events, so in other words, Broken Trinity at the bottom here and the Firstborn event at the top in that dotted circle there, they are collected here. This is a beautiful oversized hardcover with a slipcase and an enclosed massive piece of poster art and a silk ribbon bookmark. This is actually the same size as the DC Absolute Edition and it is just gorgeous. It's worth noting this is one of only 2 absolute size collections in the entire Artifactiverse, and we'll discuss the second one in the next video. Whilst this is beautiful, there are unfortunately 2 problems with it. Firstly, it does not include the issues in Witchblade Volume 6. In other words, it doesn't include issues 116 to 120. What that means is that you will essentially have everything that was in Volume 5 of Witchblade. You won't have what was in that Volume 6 I just showed you, and then it goes into Broken Trinity. So essentially, it's a bit of a gap in the narrative, and it would be a bit jarring to read it like that. It's very frustrating that they missed out that middle section which connects the 2 story events. The second issue is that this is hugely out of print. This is a massive whale, the whaliest of whales. It goes for several £100s on secondary markets like eBay. So good luck trying to find it. Jumping back to the map here, what that means is that the Absolute Edition we were just looking at holds everything in the top volume there, in the dotted circle, and everything in the bottom volume, but it won't actually show what was in the middle volume here that has the picture of Sarah and Danielle on the cover. So frustrating. Whether or not you want to buy it is up to you. It's always a matter of taste. Let's continue moving on. After Broken Trinity, we have this volume, which is a volume with a small v7 or collection 7. Again, it actually lacks a subtitle, but it's got this really cool cover. Look at that. Look at that. That's beautiful. Now that collects Broken Trinity Prelude randomly, and then also Witchblade issues 121 to 124, and then Witchblade Annual 1. It's a really good read. That then moves smoothly on to Volume 8, which does have a subtitle and is called Witchblade War of the Witchblades. That contains issues 125 to 130. Beautiful artwork, beautiful covers. I hope that's all clear. Now, before we go any further, I just want to highlight a couple of things, or one thing really. What I should point out at this juncture is that we've seen well, what's the best way to put this? The numbering for the issues doesn't change. I can't stress that enough. Witchblade is from issue 1 up to 185. As we've seen at the top here, we start for some reason going back into volume 1 or volume with a small v1. So volume 1 is written on the spine, and then 2, 3, 4, all the way down to this, which is volume 8. Now the annoying thing is that next whilst the individual issues can continue being numbered onto the next 131, 132, the numbering of the trade collections does change. It resets back to volume with a small v1. So what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that this here is actually Witchblade Volume 1, collecting issues 131 to 136. Now, to try to make it slightly easier, although it's stupid, what they tried to do was call it Witchblade Redemption. So they've added another subtitle to it. However, they've kept the numbering of the issues. I hope that's clear, guys. As always, look for the cover, check the back of it, make sure it contains issues 131 to 136. Even though it has a 1 on the spine, this is not the beginning of Witchblade. This starts off with issue 131. I hope that's clear. I know this is really confusing. Imagine what it was like for me trying to work this out all by myself with no guide and no help. So this volume is great, of course. It contains cameos from both Aphrodite 4 and also Hunter Killer. I should point out at this juncture, we've already seen a few small cameos from Aphrodite by this point, and you may be wondering why there's such a small impact so far. I've hyped this character so much at the start of this series of videos by describing her as the glue of the entire Artifactiverse. Well, we'll see in the fullness of time. So that's Witchblade Redemption Volume with a small v1, collecting issues 131 to 136. And that then moves on to this volume, which is hugely out of print. This is Witchblade Redemption Volume with a small v2, which collects issues 137 to 141. But, and this is critical, when you read this, you need to read issue 0 and then issue 1 of the Artifact series. Artifacts is a series which is over here. There we go, way down there. You need to read issue 0 and issue 1 of that between issues 137 and 138. I hate doing this, as I'm a big believer in relaxed reading that isn't a slave to continuity. But in this case, not reading those two issues in the middle of this trade collection makes the collection unreadable. It makes it impossible to follow. Top Cow made a mistake in their solicitation, in other words, and frankly, this is something that is begging to be custom bound and rebound. So, just to confirm, that's Witchblade issue 137, Artifacts issue 0, Artifacts issue 1, and then Witchblade issue 138 to 141. Now, whilst this collection exists, I've left the line around it dotted to indicate it's not collected properly. So moving on from that and moving down, we have this volume. This is also massively out of print. This is Witchblade Redemption Volume 3. Okay, right, I'm going to carry on. So this is Witchblade Redemption Volume 3. That covers Annual 2 of Witchblade and then also issues 142 to 145. That's the order to read them in. Massively out of print, expensive to get hold of. And next we have this, which is the last Witchblade collection we're going to read in the Artifacts era. This is Witchblade Redemption Volume 4, containing issues 146 to 150. There's the cover. Very cool. Now, I am extremely conscious at this stage that this leaves the Artifacts series, which we can see just over here on the side, as a bit of an oddity. And you may be thinking that we need to look at that next. Now, that is tempting, but to be honest, I would recommend we would not do so. The last issue of Artifacts in this era, Artifacts issue 13, represents a climax for every single run of this era. All the series, all the characters, and so on. So it's important that you trust me because we don't want to get to this part because it'll spoil everything else. So we want to hold off reading that for now. As a result, before we finish today, I would like to run through the Darkness issues that comprise this era. So we've just done Witchblade, and what I want to now talk about is the Darkness. Okay, so here's the Darkness issues here. We talked about this part in one of the previous videos when we talked about the Origins era, where we had issues 21 to 24, or 61 to 64, and then the Four Horsemen miniseries. So this is where Darkness now lives. Now, from my previous videos, I did point out that Darkness is one uninterrupted stretch of issues, much like Witchblade. This is what I call volume with a big V. You'll remember that sometimes we see the collected trade paperbacks that have renumbered spines, and we can call these volumes with a small v. And obviously we've seen this problem in Witchblade several times over. The Darkness is a bit more annoying than most, in that it had a 40 issue run at the start of the Origins era, which we've already seen way up here. And that is then followed by this sort of secondary run that was numbered issues 1 to 24. And the problem is that in the Artifacts era, when Darkness started up again, they continued with the original numbering. In other words, this started with issue 65. Not issues 25, not even issues 1, issue 65. Now, I have heard a few conflicting things about this, that when this originally came out in physical issues, actually it started off with issue 1, and then it was issue 1 to 10, and then they started renumbering the physical issues to issue 75. I haven't managed to confirm if that's the case. I don't know. It might be the case. If it is, please keep an eye out if you're looking at these single issues. For those of you who are watching who are familiar with DC and Marvel comics, this is something called legacy numbering, which is where the big companies sometimes do that when they reach a big milestone, like the 1000th issue of Action Comics or something. In fact, here's an example from Invincible Iron Man. Marvel actually released a range of these at one point to explain all the different volumes with the big V and the numbering in them, and then how this all added up to what they call the legacy number. Back in our map, here it's just a bit annoying if you're reading a single issue like I was. Maybe one day I'll do a video about legacy numbering and volumes with bigs and small V's, just to make it a bit clearer. But until then, let's just plow on. Anyway, this era of Darkness trade collections all had the same subtitle. It's a subtitle which is called Accursed, and it's a bit like the Witchblade ones having subtitles like Redemption. So let's have a look at this. You've got Accursed Volume 1, which contains issues 65 to 70. Accursed Volume 2, which contains issues 71 to 75. Accursed Volume 3 or Collection 3, which contains a one-shot called Lodbrok's Hand, and then single issues 76 to 79. Lodbrok's Hand has got nothing to do with anything. It's kind of like a standalone out of continuity story. So if you're reading in singles and you can't find that, don't worry about it. We then have the Accursed Collection Volume 4, which contains a one-shot, which is similarly not important and not relevant, called Shadows and Flame, and then it has issues 80 to 84. We then have Collection Accursed Volume 5, which collects issues 85 to 89. And after that, we then have finally Accursed Collection 6, which contains issues 90 to 95. I am conscious that this then leads into this one here, which is Accursed Volume 7, containing issues 96 to 100. But I did say that, oh, this is the final one. And the reason I said that is because the last scene of issue 95, in other words, the last scene here in this volume, and all of the issues in this volume, volume 7, issues 96 all the way to 100, are actually set after the events of Artifact issue 13, which I was just saying before was incredibly critical, has a massive effect on the universe. You can absolutely read them here by themselves as you're reading The Darkness, but if you ever reread these comics, it will make a bit more sense if you revisit them at the end of this era, a little bit like an Artifacts era epilogue. Anyway, that's The Darkness done for now. Before we leave, I just want to do a quick shout out to this one standalone series, which is a series called Magdalena. So this is Magdalena volume with a big V3. It's a 12-issue series. It's pretty good, and it's set in this era at no real fixed point. So I've just stuck it here. It's collected in 2 trade paperback collections. So the first one's at the top here, and the second one is at the bottom here. Each one contains 6 issues, and they're both written by Ron Marz, who's busy writing Witchblade at the same time as well. So if you're interested in that, you want to check this out, please do. Okay, let's pull back for a bit of context, and let's have a look at what we've covered so far today. Well, we've covered actually a great deal. We covered Hunter Killer, Vice and Necromancer. We covered the entire Witchblade run, including the events. We covered all of Darkness, which was really straightforward. And then we touched on Magdalena. I hope that was okay, and I hope that was clear. As always, guys, this map is available on my website for you to download free of charge. If you want to download it or print it out to follow along, please do so. It covers 902 issues, so I don't blame you. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter, where I tend to post a one-tweet daily review of whatever I've read that day. And given that I read on average around half a dozen comic issues a day, it's a great way to see what I'm up to and what I'm planning for future videos. If you want to support the channel, please do. Head over to Amazon and pick up the first novel in my pro superhero series, No Gods or Kings. It'll cost you less than $1. This is a story about a world like our own, but where superhumans are a reality, and I really hope that you dig it. It's planned as a series of 9 novels. The first 4 are already out, and it would mean a huge amount if you could pick one up and leave a review of it. If you want to read a free excerpt and the first chapter of the first book, that can be found on the same website as this reading map, which is nogodsorkings.com. The link to that is in the description below. Until next time, guys, stay classy.